Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, and welcome back to this next video. And in this video, we are going to talk about the sex determination. If you talk about the living organisms, there are many ways in which the sex differences arise. For example, if you talk about the organisms which are known as the hermaphrodite, so hermaphrodite organism that bear both male and female reproductive structure. What I mean by that is there would be a single organism, and in that particular organism, you are going to see both the male and the female reproductive structures. So these organisms they are known as the hermaphrodite. Now, there is another term that is used which is known as the hermaphroditism. So, that is going to be the condition of having both male and female reproductive organs in a single individual. So, there would be a single individual bearing both the male and the female reproductive structure. So, the organism would be known as the hermaphrodite, and the condition is known as the hermaphroditism. Now, these hermaphrodite organisms, they are sometimes also known as the monoecious organism. Monoecious would mean a single house. So there is a single organism bearing both the male and the reproductive structure. If you look at the examples of these hermaphrodite organism, one of the common example is the hibiscus plant. So this is going to be hermaphrodite. The earthworms, they are a very good example of the hermaphrodite organisms. And then you talk about the sea slugs, and there are sea slugs which are hermaphrodite in nature. In contrast to these hermaphrodite organisms, when you talk about the species in which an individual has either male or female reproductive structure, they are said to be dioecious. So dioecious would mean two houses. So the male would be a a different organism, a female would be a different organism. Or if you can say the male is going to be only having the male reproductive structure, the female they are going to have only the female reproductive structure. So single individual is only going to have a single reproductive structure, whether that is the male or the female reproductive structure. So we call them is the dioecious. So among these dioecious species, the sex of the individual they may be determined chromosomally, genetically, or environmentally. And we are going to see the examples from these three classes how the dioecious species their sex is determined chromosomally, genetically, or environmentally in the course of these videos. If I give you examples from these dioecious organisms, so if you talk about the plants, so the holy plants, they are going to be dioecious. So there would be male holy plant and there would be female holy plant. The most common example of these dioecious organisms are the human beings. So you are going to have male only having the male reproductive structure, and you are going to have female only having the female reproductive structure. So human being, they are dioecious. Now, if you talk about the sex determination systems chromosomally, so there are different systems. And in this particular video, I want to focus on a single system, which is known as the XXXO system. So what does this XXXO system means? In most animals, sex is determined by specific chromosomes. So we are talking about the sex determination system using the chromosomes. For example, if you talk about the human beings, so the females they have two X chromosomes, in the males they have a single X and a single Y chromosome. But when you talk about this XXXO system, there are some species where there is no Y chromosome at all. And this Y chromosome, that would mean that instead the presence or the absence of second X chromosome that determines the sex of that particular individual. So in the human beings, for example, this is actually the presence or the absence of the Y chromosome. When you talk about the XXXO system, this is actually the presence or the absence of the second X chromosomes that determine the sex of these individual. Now, this is the XXXO system, whether you are having two X chromosome or whether you are having a single X chromosome. Now, this O doesn't mean that there is some kind of the O chromosome. This O in biology actually stands for the absence of something. So, in this particular case, this O is going to stand for the absence of the second X chromosome. So if you talk about the females in this particular system, there would be two X chromosome that is going to make that is a female. So female are going to have two X chromosome. When you talk about the male, they are only having a single X chromosome. This O would mean the absence of the second X chromosome. So the male, they are only going to have one X chromosome. So this is actually the number of the X chromosome that determine the sex of the individual when you talk about the XXXO system. If I give you the examples from these XXXO system, grasshopper is one of the important example from this sex determination system, and the cockroaches, that would be another important example from the XXXO sex determination system. So what happens during the meiosis? So if you talk about the female in their diploid form, they are going to have two X chromosome. When you talk about the male, they are only going to have a single X chromosome, and the O would mean the absence of the second X chromosome. So during the process of the meiosis, the females, they are going to produce only a single kind of the gamete that is going to have the X chromosome. When you talk about the males during the process of the meiosis, they are going to make two kind of the gametes. One type of the gamete, they are going to have the X chromosome. The second type of the gamete, they are not going to have any X chromosome. Therefore we are representing that by O. So this is actually the sex of the individual is going to be determined by which type of the male gamete that is going to fertilize the egg, because there is no variety available in the gametes of the female, but there is variety available in the gametes of the male. So this is actually the males which determine the sex of the future generation. For example, if you are going to use the X chromosome from the female, the X chromosome from the male comes and it fertilizes this particular egg. So you are going to have two X chromosome, because one X chromosome is coming from the female, the other X chromosome is coming from the male. There are two X chromosome, so you are going to have that as a female. If you are using the this particular gamete from the male, that would mean that the male is not going to give any X chromosome. The female is going to give a single X chromosome, so you are going to have the XO, and that is going to give you the male individual. So this is the how the basis of the XXXO system. So this is actually the absence or the presence of the second X chromosome, or you can simply say this is actually the number of the X chromosome that determine the sex of the individual in the XXXO system. In the If you talk about some of the important points regarding the XXXO system, one of the important thing is no Y chromosome. That would mean there is no SRY genes that is present in the human beings, and we will talk about the SRY gene and its importance when you talk about the human beings, and when we'll be talking about the XXXY system of the sex determination. So the absence of the Y chromosome would mean that in the individual following the XXXO system, there would be no SRY genes. Now, sex determination is controlled by the chromosome number, not by specific gene in the XXXO system. And the XXXO system is actually considered as a primitive mechanism of the chromosomal sex determination. In the next video, I'll be talking about the second system of the sex determination, which is known as the XXXY system.